Hi, it's Nicole. You've been leaving some really lovely comments on my recent videos. I love reading them and I'm really happy to make a community with you guys. So in today's video, I'm going to talk through all the books I read in the month of June, but I will also respond to some comments. I try to reply to you all individually under each video, but I noticed some common threads and patterns I want to highlight here. But let's look at book first. Shakespeare, The World as a Stage by Bill Bryson. This is a biography of Shakespeare published in 2007. One thing appeals to me about this book is its size. It's so short because there's very little about Shakespeare we can know for certain, and this book sets out to see how much of Shakespeare we can know, really know, from the record. So this book starts with Shakespeare's 3 portraits and 6 existing signatures. So those portraits, there's very little solid evidence to prove that they are actually of him, and the 6 signatures, judging from which we are not even sure we are pronouncing his name or spelling his name correctly. Because the book sticks strictly to historical record, the chapter on the early years, which covers the first 21 years of Shakespeare's life, it has very little on him directly. The chapter mostly is about the historical period, for example, the plagues and the diseases in 16th century, the transition from a Catholic society to a Protestant society in England, Shakespeare's father and mother in Stratford-upon-Avon, and the schools and the education system boys went through at the time. So that's the chapter on the early years. And the chapter on the lost years, which covers his life from age 21 to age 28, it has no historical record at all. So the chapter is mostly about London, and it's fascinating to read. Apparently, there was a whale. A whale got stuck, well, nearly got stuck between the arches of London Bridge. One thing stands out to me. The author talks about a huge missed opportunities for writing down Shakespeare's life story. Both of his daughters lived long lives to the age of 66 and 77, but no one seems to have spoken to them about their father. Shakespeare was famous during his lifetime. You can tell from the writings of his contemporaries. His fellow actors wrote down his plays, and that was the first folio, but no one seems to have written down anything substantial about him as a person. It talks about Shakespeare's will. He left his wife his second best bet. What does that say about his relationship with his wife? Scholars have been speculating forever. In Ulysses, you hear a group of people discussing exactly that in a library in Dublin on 16th of June 1904. They didn't actually discuss it, obviously. They were not even there. They only existed in James Joyce's head. But the novel is so real. If we could time travel, it would be a shock if we didn't find them there. That chapter of Ulysses stands out a bit more to me this time around I read it, because now I know a little bit more about Shakespeare's life and works than the first time I read Ulysses. So let's carry on with Ulysses by James Joyce. I made this the theme of my reading month in June because it's the 100th anniversary of its publication in Europe. I made a video all about it, sharing my reading experience and also some tips. A few of you find the tips helpful and think Ulysses less intimidating after watching my video. I'm really glad you feel encouraged or motivated to pick it up for the first time, or maybe try again. I do really hope you get on with it all right. One of you asked some book suggestions to read before diving into Ulysses, and another one of you replied with some great suggestions and a really thorough list. I really love the community feel you created. The same viewer also told me what are their favorite chapters in Ulysses. I checked those chapters out after I read your comment, and they are my favorite too. What a coincidence. I wonder why. If we do a survey, Do you think everybody would give the same answer? Maybe leave me a comment if you have read Ulysses. What are your top 3 chapters and why? So the 3 chapters both of us liked best are 8 a.m. in the house. My reason is I like the domestic details in Bloom's household, and especially his cooking. And 3 p.m. in the streets, it gives you a wider sense of Dublin. Everybody is doing their own things, but they're all connected somehow. And 5 p.m. in the tavern. In that chapter, as the story progresses, you see how the literary style changes throughout the history of English literature. It's just too clever. But more importantly for me, the ending really made me laugh. It's very funny. Next, I read A Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man by James Joyce. It's an earlier novel by James Joyce, earlier than Ulysses. It's a coming-of-age story of Stephen Dedalus, a boy growing up in Ireland at the end of the 19th century. He seems to be unhappy about a lot of things. His family, his Catholic belief, and his country. And in the end, he decided to give it all up to become an artist. It's difficult, like Ulysses. It's only about 200 pages. It's really not that long, but it took me a whole month to finish. But unlike Ulysses, it's not funny. It's serious the whole time. One of you said you would like to read something shorter by Joyce as a warm-up to Ulysses. This is shorter, and it could be a good warm-up because it introduces Stephen Dedalus, who appears in Ulysses as well. But it really is not easier. It's not easy at all, personally speaking. Let's go back to Shakespeare for a little bit. I'm going to talk about these two together. So this is Henry IV, Part 1 by William Shakespeare, and The Last Family in England by Matt Haig. I picked this one up because I've been reading Shakespeare every month, and in June I thought I would read a history. And how did I pick up this one? My colleague Pam, I'm talking about you. Pam mentioned she read The Dead Father's Club by Matt Haig, and it was a retelling of Hamlet, and she said it was not too bad. So I searched it, and the first result said Matt Haig's first book was a retelling of Henry IV, and this new book was a retelling of Hamlet. I didn't read the rest of the website very carefully because there's a retelling of Henry IV that I never heard of. I had to check it out immediately. So I did, and very luckily I got hold of it from my local library on the 28th of June and managed to finish reading by the end of the month. It was so nice. I've been struggling with big and difficult books whole month. It's so nice to finish a book in 2 days and understand exactly what's happening. Let's look at Henry IV Part 1 first. So Henry IV Part 1 is a history play. The real history happened before the Wars of the Roses, where the House of York and the House of Lancaster fought for the throne of England for decades, and the wars carried on all the way to Henry VII and ended with a marriage between the two houses. And Henry VII was the father of Henry VIII, whom I'm sure you are all a bit more familiar about. Henry IV Part 1 starts with the newly established king, Henry IV, hearing about news of rebels in Wales as well as in the north of England. While the king is concerned about his throne, his son, Prince Hal, is enjoying the company of robbers and drunkards in a tavern in London, among whom one of them is an old man called Falstaff. So very soon after that, Prince Hal is summoned to the court and to the battlefield, and the ending of the play makes it clear that there are more battles coming in Part 2. The Last Family in England by Matt Haig is a young Labrador's desperate attempt to save his master's family, told from the dogs point of view. It's a very loose retelling of Henry IV. The young Labrador prince has a mentor called Henry, who is an older Labrador, and Prince also has a new friend called Falstaff, who is a Springer Spaniel. Henry teaches Prince to fight for the mission to save all human families and to uphold the Labrador Pact, almost a religion-like code of conduct, while Falstaff preaches a life of comfort and pleasure. It's a fun idea. In the story, all human families used to have dogs, and all the dogs used to have a common goal, and that is to keep their master's family safe at all cost. But at some point in dog history, some breeds of dogs rebelled, and the idea of duty and sacrifice is not popular anymore, and now only Labradors carry on living the old way. That is all good, but problematically, the Labradors believe that they are in control of the family's happiness. But with the dog's understanding of human relationship and their feeble means of wagging tails and doing puppy eyes, their attempts to fulfill their mission soon become pathetic, ridiculous, and tragic. It's a brilliant idea, but I think some parts of the story work better than others. I will give you some examples without spoiling the story. First of all, what's the role of the grandma apart from the initial disharmony she brought into the family? There are two teenage children. They both have the usual growing up problems. The problems are described excellently, but there's no development or conclusion to those problems. And one of the family members suddenly one day could understand dog language, and the next day they just can't anymore. It's entertaining, and I think the religious connotation could generate some really interesting discussion, but overall I wouldn't say it's a first-class novel. Next, Mad About Shakespeare by Jonathan Bate. I made a video all about it. This is my favorite book of 2022 so far. Even though my video doesn't do justice to the book, I'm glad many of you left comments to say you are interested in reading it at some point in the future. So this book is partly a memoir of Jonathan Bate, who among many things is a scholar and expert in Shakespeare and many other works of English literature, and also partly a non-fiction about Shakespeare and many other literary geniuses. One of you commented to say that you haven't read Shakespeare because you are a bit intimidated. I can completely relate. The Old English, I think, sometimes is quite difficult to understand. And also, I think the way to digest a play is quite different to how we usually read a novel, so that needs some adjustment. But I think going on the Globe tour really helped me. Just remember, Shakespeare's plays were written and performed at the beginning for royalties, fair enough, but also for common people who couldn't even read or write. The Globe tour guide told us that watching a show at Globe Theatre at the beginning, it didn't have a concert hall vibe. It was not like everybody dressed up smartly and behaved civil. The audience at Globe Theatre, they were not well behaved at all. They would comment between themselves, they would shout onto the stage, eating all the while. And Shakespeare's actors really had to work hard to earn the audience attention and approval. Shakespeare might now have become an academic obsession, but the plays were not written to be academic. They were for everyone. They are for everyone. And in that sense, Shakespeare's plays are not intimidating the same way as Ulysses is, because James Joyce wrote to be different, to shock the literary world, but Shakespeare wrote to please the world. I planned this month to be the Ulysses month, but ended up reading more Shakespeare instead, but that's okay. Even in A Suitable Boy, which is about Indian culture and Indian society, you can't get away from Shakespeare at all. So yes, I'm still reading A Suitable Boy. It's been a month and a half. It's still going. I'm only 70% into the book. It's unbelievable. It's about the life of a few families in India. The story is set in 1951, a few years after the British left. So it's so long, but I'm not bored because I got to know everybody so well. It's just like watching everybody's life going on, like friends and family. I care about them, so it's not boring at all. And everyone who left a comment about A Suitable Boy seem to have had a great time reading it as well. But as a novel, it's been introducing all the characters, it's been building up for all this while. I really hope the climax is worth all this wait. I can't believe the end is just somebody becomes the new chief minister and later finds a husband. I can't believe that's all there is to this novel. But if it is, it might be told in a very inspiring and excellent way. Who knows? I'm looking forward to the ending and the climax. If you have read it, please don't tell me what happens in the end. Please don't leave me a comment about it. Lastly, your comments on my Jane Austen July video. I asked your opinion on Georgette Heyer and I got some. Very, very interestingly, your opinions are predominantly not very positive, so I'm not reading it. I also found some planners who enjoy going down rabbit holes just like I do. Lovely. And there are also obviously some of you who are mood readers, equally lovely. And there are some fantastic recommendations for Jane Austen July. I've edited, adjusted my TBR accordingly already. Thank you very much. And also obviously it's really lovely to hear about what you are going to read in July. So thank you so much for all your comments. That's all for today. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in my next one.